Greetings, mortals, and welcome back to Arc Talking Political Stuff. So this time I am going to be using a bit more in the way of numbers, and I'm going to talk a little bit more economics. I've taken a couple of economics courses, so I know some super elite information, like, for example, that service jobs are better than industrial jobs, which are better than agriculture jobs. Yay! I understand things. So I'm going to talk about slavery, and I'm going to talk about NAFTA. And I'm going to talk about them in the same breath because they're both pretty similar in terms of their economic impact. Slavery made a group of people who were basically, it made a group of people very wealthy while shitting on absolutely everyone else in the economy. Okay, so the southern states had very weak agricultural based economies that were basically propped up by the fact that they had slaves. Okay, those slaves were super cheap, very cost effective. I mean, they're self-reproducing, so you buy two slaves and you have slaves forever for generations. So when the slaves disappeared, or rather when the slaves transitioned into technically paid labor, the costs for pretty much everyone increased, right? The slaves got probably about the same degree of treatment as they got as slaves for a good deal of time. And everyone else had increased costs associated with the management, because all of a sudden you have to give money to the slaves and you can't just have them build their own shit and expect it to function economically. So at any rate, it was a weird situation, and it was very economically devastating when I hesitate to say economically devastating. Slavery was disguising a fundamental problem, and that's why so similar to NAFTA is that the abolishment of slavery brought to bear just how weak the footing of the economy of the South was. It demonstrated clearly that this is not a viable economy, and it wasn't a viable economy then, really. And the southern states have been sort of limping along ever since, and sort of the Confederate states have been limping along ever since, and some of them have managed to recover economically, but most of them have not. So most of the Confederate states are below the national average in terms of GDP per capita. Most of them are relatively poor, and some of them are extremely poor. Particularly the states in the deep South are very, very poor. So I'll use Mississippi as an example because it's the poorest state in the country, and it's really depressing. Think for a moment, and just you can pause the video after I ask the question so that you don't get the answer immediately. What do you think the percentage difference is between the people in Mississippi, which is the poorest state in the Union, and the people that are in the richest state in the Union? Now, Mississippi is particularly poor relative to the next people in line, with them having a marginal difference of them versus the next people of about 10%. The next state in the Union is about 10% wealthier than Mississippi. I think maybe a little tiny bit more than 10%. But the top state, there's about 8 of them that are pretty much within that 10% margin. The next 8 states are pretty much within 10%. So it's not like you have one outlier. You have quite a few states that are up there, and then you have sort of just, a staircase going down where it's like you drop a little bit here, drop a little bit there, but the numbers are going there. So what's the percentage difference between the poorest state of Mississippi and the richest state, which is Alaska? I'll even tell you what the numbers are, or what the different states are. So pause the video now if you want to think about it for a bit, or if you want to Google and cheat. I don't know why you'd Google and cheat. That seems silly because you're only cheating yourself. Whatever. This is about thinking about your pre-assumptions and altering them. Number you're looking for is 209%. So the average Alaskan makes 209%, so more than double what the average person in Mississippi makes. The GDP of Alaska per capita is massive compared to them. But it's not just Alaska. So the states that are above 200% include Alaska, North Dakota, Connecticut, New York, and not quite Delaware. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 states, with Alaska at 66,835 for their GDP, and Delaware at 63,463. Then you have Mississippi sitting on a delicious 31,894. So poor as hell. You also have other states that are pretty close but not quite double them. So the states that are above 60,000 include also Massachusetts, Wyoming, and if I didn't mention any other ones at the top, there's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 total at the top. The District of Columbia is also on this list, but the District of Columbia doesn't count because that's a very weird economy. That's a very strange economy. The GDP per capita in DC, by the way, is 160,000. To give you an idea of how weird the economy of DC is, because there's so many extremely highly paid individuals and like government officials and stuff like that. So probably extremely highly paid. What are those things? Anyway, basic gist is that there are several states in the union that are twice as wealthy as Mississippi, and that's a huge issue. I mean, that's not small. We're talking about a difference of over 100%, and the difference between them and the mean, right? The average is 49,844. That's like a 70% difference. We're talking about like the majority of their economy being added to it to get back to the average. I mean, these are huge, massive differences. So they are very poor. Like Mississippi is a very poor economy, and the reason it's poor is because it's predominantly an agriculture economy. And as anyone who's taken an economics class knows, service, industrial, down here where you can't see it, agriculture, because agriculture sucks. Agriculture is only suitable for developing nations. Anyone who isn't in a developing nation should not be doing agriculture. People in America should not be doing agriculture because you can't make money doing agriculture. It's a very, very low paying job that is extremely labor intensive, takes a huge amount of time, and it takes a huge amount of land. It's just really a shitty job. It's not something that we should be doing with our economy because there's no reason for it. Sure, we have plenty of space, but if we want to do if we want to do agriculture in our country, then the only way to do it is to rely 100% on migrant workers. You just say, okay, well, we're going to just hire a bunch of Mexicans to come do the actual agricultural work, and then we need to actually have the majority of the people in the local economy, so the economy of Mississippi, the majority of those people need to be doing service jobs, right? With some of them doing industrial jobs, and then the foreigners are the ones who are working the fields. Because if you have a bunch of farmers in Mississippi, I mean, how are they supposed to make any money? You don't make money with crops anymore, right? Any economist will tell you that, right? You can't make money on crops in a first world country. It's just not possible. So Mississippi's economy needs to be upgraded to the 20th century, which means doing industrial stuff. And then once we've updated it to the 20th century, we need to then update it again to get it to the 21st century, because toward the end of the 20th century, we started moving towards service jobs. And we're now like almost 20% of the way into the new century, and everyone's doing service if they're making any money. So this is important. It's been important for a long time, and it's something that everyone has ignored on both sides of the aisle, because the Republicans just talk about trying to compete with China because the Republicans like exploiting poor people. Whether it's for money or for votes, the Republicans like exploiting poor Americans. That's been what they've run on, and it is something that collapsed from under them and is the reason why they lost control of their party, is because it was fundamentally untenable. They can't continue doing that forever. You can't keep shitting on the people that are, electing you forever without them eventually turning against you. So, at any rate, so a new group is taking over. There's the whole coup thing. There's a whole other video for that. So, the reason that it's particularly important now is that this is the reason that Donald Trump won. Now, you'll note that all of the states that are, well, not all of them, but like the agricultural states where people are poor predominantly are Republican, right? They're predominantly Republican states. The blue states are doing fine for themselves. They're very wealthy. Almost all of the states that are in the top 17 are either oil states or they are blue states, because people in advanced economies care more about like civil rights and things like that. Those are the things that they're thinking about, whereas the people that are in poor states care about putting food on the table. And the Republican Party's like basically complete disinterest in civil rights issues works really well for them, because they can point at the Mexicans and say, oh, those guys are responsible for the fact that you're poor, as opposed to saying the people responsible for the fact that you're poor are the people who abolished slavery and then didn't replace the slave economy with a modern economy for 100 years. Okay, the people who, that's everyone, the whole country, did not come together to say, well, if we're not going to be doing the slavery thing, then plantations aren't really going to work. So what can we do instead? And we need to figure that out. And there's ways that we can work around it, and it's going to involve, migrant laborers, legal migrant laborers. We need to get a system in place where migrant laborers can come in, work these farms, and go back out, and everyone knows what's going on, because it's easy for these people to come in. The problem is that if you have a bunch of locals who are super poor and literally working as farmhands in America, then you have political backlash to that. But if all of the people in Mississippi are doing service jobs, and then you have a few people who own farms and want to exploit all the massive land that they have by hiring cheap laborers to come in, work legal hours, work within a legal context, and make whatever money that they can, because they might not be able to hire people from Mexico. People from Mexico might be too expensive to be profitable. You might need to hire people from somewhere cheaper. Them's the breaks, right? We have to figure out how we can get agriculture to work. But we can't get agriculture to work as long as it's the primary thing in the Mississippi economy. The Mississippi economy has to be based off of services and high-end manufacturing, or other industrial stuff, because if it isn't based off of that, then everyone's poor. It's just that simple. If you don't have a service-based economy, everyone is poor. So we need to move it to a service-based economy, and we need to do that as a country. Now, I've talked a lot about this, and I haven't really gotten into why it's particularly important now yet. The reason that it's particularly important now is that we have NAFTA is a similar situation to the abolishment of slavery, in that we have a bunch of states that have been basically running shitty economies forever, and we just basically exploded them by allowing for free trade between America and Mexico. Low-end and mid-range manufacturing jobs are now gone, because there's no reason to do them in America when you can do them in Mexico. So the Rust Belt is falling apart. The economy of the Rust Belt is falling to pieces, and that is what voted Donald Trump into office. Is those poor people who were doing manufacturing jobs and aren't anymore, or who are doing these low-end manufacturing jobs and seeing their communities and their economy collapse into non-existence. And nobody seems to give a shit about them, except Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump was the only person going out there and saying, fuck Mexico. I'm gonna put huge tariffs on Mexico. And it's not that these people are racist. They don't hate Mexicans because, of some ethereal thing. They hate Mexico because their factory is being shut down and management is telling them that it's being built in Mexico. That's why they hate Mexico. It's not that they're racist. It's that they're economically pragmatic. And there are certainly white nationalists and serious racists out there, and these kinds of legitimate anger issues are what drive more deep-seated hatreds, right? So sure, there's plenty of people who started getting angry at Mexicans because of the fact that their economy is collapsing because of free trade with Mexico, who have since evolved into frothing racist madmen. But mostly, people are just pissed because they need their economy to work. And so we have a similar situation in the Rust Belt where we need this economy is also based off of fundamentally outdated industrial shit that shouldn't be done in America. But if you listen to politicians talk about it, and if you listen to the media talk about it, they're like, oh, we need to keep these jobs here. We need to not put these jobs into China. We need to, we need to keep the jobs here. And we don't. This is so important. We do not need shitty industrial jobs. We do not need shitty agricultural jobs. We need these people to be doing better jobs. And it's not their fault. It's not the fault of these people what their economy is. Their economy is a localized economy. They can only do so much. So they need to have investment from the rest of the country into upgrading their economies. Okay? There needs to be a federal focus on taking these economies and upgrading them. And it's not sexy, and that's the problem, is that the Democrats only give a shit about sexy civil rights issues. Okay? That's all they care about. They ignore everything else. They don't care about fiscal responsibility. They don't really care about whether their programs work. They just care about throwing money at them, right? And people just have a short attention span on the liberal side. They want to do something good, so something sounds good, so they're going to do it, and then they forget about it. Okay, that's how the liberals work. And the Republicans, or sorry, not the Republicans, the conservatives, because there's again, it's all fractured now. And the conservatives, frankly, don't give a shit about poor people. The conservatives that are actually in power do not care about poor people at all. They have been exploiting them for generations now by simultaneously appealing to them by telling them that, ooh, it's the Mexicans who are to blame. Ooh, it's the, filthy immigrants who are to blame. Ooh, it's the black people that are to blame. It's the Jews who are to blame. Is the this, is the that. All these other people, while always ignoring the fact that they're continuously cutting the programs that are supposed to help the same people that they are getting votes from. Because if you look at the federal government and where its money is going, that all this wasted money that the federal government is spending, it's all going to red states. Because the blue states are economically fine, so they pay a huge amount in taxes because they're the rich states, and internally they have to take care of their own shit. So if you look at New York City has a city tax. You know why it has a city tax? Because all the money from New York City that's going to the state and the federal government, none of it comes back to New York City. None of it. So if New York City wants to be able to maintain its infrastructure and maintain, law and order and keep the lights on, they need to tax on a city level because all of that taxation is going elsewhere. It's an expensive city to run. It's an expensive city to manage, and they can't do it on federal and state tax dollars. They have to do it with their own minimum tax. And the reason is because all of those tax dollars are going to poorer, more conservative communities. So them's the breaks. So yes, the liberals are paying for the conservatives, but they're doing it in a shitty manner. Because the federal government does not do things very effectively. It's not very competent. So the thing is that we need to start upgrading these economies. And the best way to do that is for the federal government, and it has to be the feds. Nobody else can really do it because the state governments don't have the money for it. You can't expect the government of a state that has a GDP of $30,000 a year to rely on the taxes from the locals to upgrade their economy. They can't do it. You need the New Yorkers and the Californians and all these other people who are paying federal taxes. need some of those taxes to go to the southern states to specific programs. Don't just give it to the states willy-nilly, with very clear, requirements, right? This is money that's allocated for this industry. If you make a business that is, an electronics business of some sort, right? If you make a software business in Mississippi, you get a bunch of tax credits and you get a bunch of money and whatever, right? That we're willing to do this stuff for you. It's worked in Singapore. The Singapore economy has gone from basically like shitty low end manufacturing of stuff like nets to high end manufacturing of drugs and shit called gene guns. Do you know that gene gun is a thing? You can like shoot genes into things. It's awesome. Okay, shoot might be a bit of a strong word, but that was created in Singapore, the country that 30 years ago was developing nets. And not new types of nets. They're just manufacturing old net technology, like fishing nets, okay? The economy has grown because the government has invested all of its efforts into educating people and developing them. Not just the new generation. We're not talking about just kids in school. We're talking about investing into those guys who are building nets right now. Let's see if we can upgrade them so that they can start working on cars, right? And then they can start working on, higher and higher tier stuff. And eventually you get to the point where you have an economy that's 4 times as strong because all these people who were working in really shitty jobs before are now working in extremely high-end jobs. And it's the same people. It's the same people working in higher skill jobs because the government has done the investment and they've done the propaganda necessary externally to convince the rest of the world that Singapore was worth investing in. So foreign investors came into Singapore because they saw it as a stable place that they could reliably put their money and invest it into getting good returns. And because they got those returns, they kept doing it. And if the federal government of America does the same thing with Mississippi, they can take a lot of shit from what has been done in Singapore. And honestly, the Mississippi government can do some of this as well, right? But not everyone has Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew was not only amazing at organizing shit and keeping corruption down and doing a variety of other things, he was a great propagandist, okay? He sold the Singapore people like nobody's business. And I don't mean like in a slavery sense. I mean in a sense of like he made people believe that the Singaporeans were like these gods that were going to be amazing and were extremely cheap but extremely good at their jobs. They're just people like anyone else. He's just a great salesman. So anyway, so you can't expect the state level to be able to accomplish the kind of miracle that Lee Kuan Yew was able to accomplish with Singapore. But you can do it with federal funding, and you can do it with federal incentives and things like that. And so we need to do that in Mississippi, and we need to do that in all of the economies that currently are not based off of services. So I'd like for people to, I mean, if you've enjoyed this, you think that I'm right, then please share this with people. This is I think an important political issue that goes completely ignored. The need that we have to prop up the weak, or not just prop up, the need that we have to upgrade the weaker economies that we have, the failing economies that we have in the United States. We keep just propping them up and just ignoring them. Like, okay, we'll just give more subsidies to agriculture. Oh, more subsidies to agriculture. Ooh, corn needs more subsidies. We don't. We need to be moving away from agriculture and industrial jobs. We just do. We need to be moving our economy into the modern world, and we need to be doing it across the entire United States. And there are ways to do it. It needs to be taken very seriously, because if the government continues to ignore poor people throughout the entire country because they're not the people that are voting for them, then the entire country is going to eventually devolve into a horror show where you have these extremely poor, like, what's God, I can think of the Malay word, but I can't think of the rural areas. You have extremely poor rural areas that are doing, agriculture still and still doing industrial stuff. And then you have the urban areas that are just rich as fuck because they're going to continue getting richer. Their economies are just going to continue developing. So we need to fix that. Thank you everyone for watching. If you think that this is a serious issue, please share it with people that you know. And don't just share it with Americans, because I think this is a problem with democracy fundamentally, is that people talk about sexy stuff that's easy to fix. Like stuff like gay marriage, sexy, easy to fix, right? Not hard. The only thing that's hard is getting people to agree to fix it. Aside from that, it's very easy. But this kind of stuff is actually much more difficult, much more complicated, does not give immediate results, and it's extremely unpopular because the people of Mississippi are not going to want to change from their agricultural economy. They just want to get more money for doing the same job that they've always been doing and they already know how to do. There's going to be blowback from people who are like, "Ooh, well, it's part of our culture." Well, sorry, but your job is not your culture and your job is not who you are. You need to upgrade your job. And as the rest of the country, we need to force this to happen. We need these states to do this, because if they don't, they're going to be poor forever. So share this if you believe in it. Put a counter argument in the comments if you think that I'm wrong about some of this, right? If you think that I've oversimplified something, or that you think I'm wrong. This is something that I think is very important, and I would love to have more information on this. So yeah, next time I'll focus probably on another issue that I think is important but not getting enough attention. So later, folks.